Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you.
And what a great setup, right? For speaking in tongues tonight. We're speaking about the spiritual gift of language, which is how it is that we express and how it is that we connect. And for many of you who may have come out of traditional Christianity or some ecstatic practices or charismatic churches, or evangelical, speaking in tongues was always recognized as a reliable part of the spiritual practice or the capabilities of people who have really opened themselves to Spirit, who really feeling and allowing themselves to feel that connection with God. And in some other traditions, it's judged mightily because it is foreign to that tradition or to those cultures. And so in Christianity, there's been kind of two camps on that subject, which I thought would be so much fun for Unity to explore for those reasons. So our spiritual gift of language, speaking in tongues, is named in the Bible as a gift of the Spirit, but only some Christian denominations practice the gift, as I said. So exactly what is speaking in tongues? Well, it's described as glossolalia, that's a Latin term, and it refers to like a free flow of syllables whose rhythm resembles speech. It's a spontaneous sort of reaction or response to a spiritual experience or to a movement of spirit in an individual. The meaning is often unknown to the speaker. They feel that flow, they don't really understand it or can't really explain it to anyone, and the hearers can't recognize it. It's not a viable, I would say, human language. It's not a language in any kind of culture, it's just sort of a series of syllables. When the speaker does understand and interprets the gift, it is then referred to as prophecy, because there is the gift of prophecy, which you can refer to on our website because we did it 2 weeks ago. In fact, I did it. And it really has to do with how it is when we can see a pattern, when we can feel a movement, when we can see things coming together, and we can feel that truth rising up in us, and we can speak to that and offer that as guidance. And prophecy, I'll just dip back into it for a second to say, prophecy is not about predicting the future. It is about seeing things as they are, and that if nothing changes and nothing is altered, that the future can be derived from it. You can see what can happen if this pattern continues in this way, good, bad, or indifferent. Okay, you'll have to see the rest of the service for the rest of the things on prophecy. But we're back on interpreting tongues because interpreting tongues is itself a gift. Okay, so somebody's speaking in tongues, somebody else hears and interprets. Paul, as he described all of these things, when somebody understands the gift of prophecy or somebody understands the tongues, speaking in tongues, Paul describes it as being more beneficial to the spiritual community when the speaking in tongues is interpreted. Which makes sense, right? Because if nobody understands it, there's not really any edification that's happening. And so his opinion, which is all it really is that Paul said that speaking in tongues with an interpretation is really beneficial to the spiritual community. Otherwise, it's not really meant for human beings. It's really a language directed to God. It's really meant to be a communication with God. That was how he saw it. And he thought prophecy was far superior because it actually helped the community to understand messages perhaps from Spirit or from the divine place. Though he does admit that he had the gift of tongues too. So if you know anything about Paul, you'll know that he was never shy or humble about anything. And so if he, even though he sort of sounded like he spent a whole chapter dissing tongues, it seemed to me, as I was reading through it, but then he just mentions, casually that he too, of course, could speak in tongues. So it's always this kind of dichotomy of whether or not how spiritual are we, and that kind of display could actually be a place for ego to take a stand, isn't it? So Paul describes this gift of interpreting tongues being someone other than the speaker of tongues, so that pairing the speaker and the interpreter was really the best thing. The purpose of speaking tongues, though, what would that be, really? Speaking in tongues is actually a consequence in reality when it's not attached to an ego or somebody who needs to display how spiritual they are, if that is entering into the picture, but a true experience of this overflow of energy is a consequence of the movement of the Kundalini energy and an ecstatic outpouring of syllables and sound. And so when someone just feels that they are so full of the Spirit, that they have really been activated, when they really feel that there's a movement inside of them, sometimes it's just sort of it starts off as a sigh and it can move into an expression, and then it's just a release, really, of using the vocal cords and the vocalizing, the release of these syllables or sounds, really, sighs of spirit. It is thought that this is the language of the angels. It was always believed to be referred to in that way. It is a release of spiritual energy in the form of sound, but it doesn't have a specific meaning necessarily. So when there's a devotional or ecstatic spiritual experience that somebody is going through, a rising of the vibrational pattern, like when there's a community of people who are rising in that spiritual energy through sometimes ecstatic dance or singing and really movement, and there is a high energy for spiritual experience, there is really something valuable in that. There really is an expression and a feeling that moves through the person, and various people react to that in different ways. Sometimes people fall out. That's another experience that you'll see in charismatic or evangelical churches, where there's an expression of that where they literally pass out. They just get in such a high state of ecstasy, really, and have that experience. This is not common in other Christian traditions necessarily, or part of the culture, but it is definitely in something valuable and something powerful. And it actually, I think in a lot of ways, it mirrors what we see in Eastern traditions, where the movement of the Kundalini energy is worked with, and it's understood, it's trained, so that when that energy moves, you know how to allow it to move, and you don't resist it, and it's not foreign to you. It's something that you can allow and work with, and allow it to change not only your spiritual understanding, but your physical being as well. It can help to open your mind and your heart in a big way. Now, it doesn't mean that some people actually have those gifts, so to speak, and others don't. We all do, but we may express them differently. And so the access to the movement of the Kundalini experience, or to the Kundalini energy moving, is many varieties of ways that Kundalini shows up in our experience. It can show up as heat. Sometimes people's hands, I know in meditation, I've often heard of people's hands warming up. Very often people who are healers or who become healers later on in their spiritual development will notice that their hands get warm. Some people feel it shooting energy, or a shooting kind of current like electricity moving through their body, can feel water washing over their face or down their back or neck, that kind of thing when they're sitting in prayer. All of these kinds of experiences are part of that expression of the spiritual energy that's being released in the body to be in harmony with really where the mind and the heart and the soul are going as you begin to develop more spiritually. I suspect that there are people sitting out here that have had that experience, continue to have that, may have had it at various times in your life. These are all things that I don't think we're always well trained in the Western traditions to recognize or to allow for or to understand. And so I just wanted to really just normalize human spirituality is not something that happens to them over there or only in those kinds of traditions or those strange people over there. It really has to do with, it comes through all of us in some different form, in some way that we may or may not be recognizing. Now, speaking in tongues is not necessarily enlightening, but it's actually a sign that some illumination or spiritual understanding is breaking through because of the release of that spiritual energy, stimulated by new spiritual practices, sometimes like yoga, or new ideas that we're coming into where you're studying, you're taking classes, and you're understanding some of the metaphysics, and the metaphysics are starting to open you up in a whole new way in understanding. Books and other teachings. Spontaneous movement of energy can happen when you begin meditating for periods of time, or in contemplation, when you're just allowing yourself some soft reverie, maybe on your porch or for a stroll through the woods where you're really feeling yourself really embraced by nature. In those kinds of experiences, they really become a secondary kind of spiritual experience, and in that, a lot of times an opening will occur, an illumination, an insight, or maybe just like a major shift, a kind of a spontaneous experience. It doesn't have to. And if it's never happened to you, it doesn't make you weird, and it doesn't make you not spiritual. But if you've had it, it also doesn't make you crazy, you know? And I just really want you to hear that these kinds of things are part of the human spiritual experience and part of our human spirituality. Visions can happen, or voices, and that's distinct from the symptoms of mental disorder by their effects on a person. In other words, when a vision or when you have a vision or you hear voices, if they are uplifting and if they're invigorating, if they're bringing you a message that really uplifts you or helps you to feel more open or more connected to everything. It's very different than when there's voices or visions that are creating fear or anger, or if they're feeling isolated or feeling, what is that called when you think everybody's after you? That's it, paranoid. If you're paranoid, that's the thing I was looking for. So you get that. When there's a negative influence, that's always a good sign of something that needs other attention from a mental health professional. But when you have these kinds of experiences that are visions or voices that are uplifting and that really open your heart and that help you to feel more connected, and yet still remain grounded, those are really part of a natural flow of spiritual development. Now, the other thing to know about any of these kinds of symptoms of spiritual growth is that they don't make us special. You know what I mean by that? How many Course in Miracles people are out here? Raise your hand. There's a term in Course in Miracles that's about being special, and special means terminally unique. You know, like, you're special because this happened to you in this kind of way, or I'm special, or I'm becoming more special because this has happened. And then I start to separate myself from everybody else because now I'm on rarefied air. I'm in a whole new class of all myself, right? Well, you can see how that's a setup for spiritualized ego, right? This is not what a healthy spiritual development will look like. A healthy spiritual development is always going to be broadening and opening and connecting in a bigger way with more and more of all that is, and really opening our hearts in a place of union and connection. We are multidimensional spiritual beings capable of accessing other realms. We do it on a regular basis whether we are conscious of it or not. And when we are conscious and when we do reach these places, we needn't fear them. But stay open to it and talk about it with other people whose path we respect, whose understanding may be further down the track than ours. And if necessary, get some counseling or some therapy if you feel that it's something that's upsetting to you. But don't shut it down, because this kind of movement of spirit will often take you to a place you're really getting prepared to enter into. Because that's what spiritual growth really is. It's something that wholesale changes how it is that we interact with the world. And so naturally, at times, there's going to be some readjustment, realignment that has to happen if we're really making progress. Rabindranath Tagore said, "The progress of our soul is like a perfect poem. It has an infinite idea which, once realized, makes all movements full of meaning and joy." The progress of our soul is like a perfect poem. It's an infinite idea which, once realized, makes all movements full of meaning and joy. This is actually where we are headed. This is who we are. Brian Doyle talks about a deep connection. He says, "A friend of mine no longer drinks alcohol. She says, 'It's a good thing I don't drink. I drank way too much, way too often,' which is a polite way to say disaster and chaos and danger and smash. She said, 'The thing is, I tried to stop, and each time I started again, I felt about 1 inch tall. But I always felt that some great, gentle attentiveness was waiting for me with tenderness and patience. The only thing that drove me to stop again and again wasn't sense and reason and court and cost, but that deep feeling that some force, some coherent, loving thing was waiting for me with open arms.' Use the word God if you want," she said. "I've grown very leery of words. People begin to think that words define or explain things that they can't come anywhere close to explaining, or understanding for that matter. God is one of those words. Love, I think, is another. But I felt that patient, relentless mercy very powerfully. I felt it waiting for me to finally stop and then stay stopped. Miracle is another word we throw around, but I'm a miracle. I would have gone to prison or died or both. I couldn't have stopped without the patient, tender mercy being there deep down. I wake up every day and talk to the mercy. I ask for help. Everyone wants to explain or dismiss miracles, and my attitude is, why not just enjoy the fact that such things happen all day, everywhere in the world? Why get fussy about the words for it? Why argue about other people's words for it? There was some endlessly patient, unquenchable tenderness there for me. Believe me, I know what I'm talking about. Joan Chittister wrote Monasteries of the Heart, said, "Find the thing that stirs your heart and make room for it. Life is about the development of self to the point of unbridled joy." Joy. I will tell you, it is an indelible consequence of spiritual growth. Because I don't know about you, but I felt like I left joy after I turned 9 years old. I really thought joy was for little kids. I thought joy was for, people who had no problems, who didn't know about the world, who didn't have responsibilities, who didn't know how life really was, right? I rediscovered joy in recovery, in 12-step, in unity, in the continuous growth and process of letting go of my fears and my judgments and my resentments and my unforgiveness of self and others, of all the things that we do in our healing work, but also in our spiritual work. It's all the same thing, really. Just depends on what book you're reading and what group you're talking to it with, right? And so here's the thing. This is a natural evolution of returning to the joy. And when you find moments of joy, sit in it as long as you can. And then remember it and honor it and talk about it until somehow you reach that rarefied air again and you feel that joy again. And call it by its name. Don't just say, well, I felt kind of happy for no reason today. I felt joy today. I feel it right now. Don't you feel it right now? Don't you let yourself feel a little lift, a little joy, a little for no reason? Nothing has to change around you. No circumstances or conditions have to collide or conspire to bring you joy. You bring the joy. You have joy. You are the joy. And whenever you get out of yourself long enough to just open and feel it, joy becomes your experience. In the Pentecost, the apostles, you might remember, emerged from hiding in the upper room after the ascension. And it says in the Bible that they were filled with the Spirit. And that Spirit, filled with the Spirit, was depicted by tongues of fire over their heads. They spoke to Jews outside of the room gathered from many countries who spoke different languages and dialects. And each of the people out there, after the apostles came out to speak to them, heard their language being spoken by the apostles, though these Galileans couldn't possibly know all these languages. So it said that this was actually the beginning of the speaking of tongues, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to be a little bit more precise than that, because this is not that. Recall that we said speaking in tongues is really unintelligible syllables. It's really something that is a different kind of ecstatic spiritual outpouring that we talked about already. What was happening with the apostles is known as xenolalia, which means speaking a language that might have been previously unknown by the speaker. Now, there's scientific documentation of people who've had head injuries or traumas or gone into comas or whatever, and very rarely, but it has happened, that they come out speaking a language they did not previously know. A human language, an understandable language, a real language. How to explain it? You can break into small groups and discuss yourselves. I have no idea exactly how. I don't think we really know how that happens. Lots of theories, and I have some theories of my own, but I won't bore you with them. But I think, in fact, this is a documented experience, and so this whole idea of the apostles coming out and speaking, this was used, this was Spirit speaking through them so that they could reach the people who needed to hear the message they had to bring. Xenolalia. Speaking truth from our hearts, without ego involved, with only a desire to touch, to reach. Now that is a true gift of tongues. That is a true gift of reaching from the interior of our hearts, from the infinite place through us, out into the world in such a way that what matters is our connection and our ability to no longer try to be right or smarter or better or any of those things, that we put aside all the needs of the ego, and instead what we really do is we come from a pure place of desire for connection, of offering what is coming through to us, something that is deeply true and something real and something significant and something that matters. Reaching someone where they are, speaking their language. Nelson Mandela said, if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. Rick Hamlin talks about a conversation he had with his mom. Hi, Mom, it's me. It's a Sunday night, and I call Mom on Sundays. 8 o'clock, my watch says. That would be 5 o'clock for Mom out in California. Oh, it's you, she says, sounding pleasantly surprised, as though she didn't expect me. I don't know if you tried earlier. I was out in the garden. I wanted to clip some roses. Oh, how are the roses, Mom? Oh, they look good this year, although it's been a hot October. I even had to turn on the air conditioning. The weather. You know, we always spend a few minutes talking about the weather. Is it getting cold back there in the east? Oh, it dropped down to the 50s. Oh, that sounds cold to me. Mom, the eternal Californian. We go from the weather to bridge and how she and her partner played at the Bridge Center. I thought we weren't doing very well at all, but we got on the board. You never know. We must have played our hands well. We enter into the minutiae of her life, what her friend brought her from the market, the book she's reading, what the physical therapist said about her leg, what happened at church that morning. At once, I had the memory of calling her when our boys were little. And then I was the one, in those days, rattling off details about her grandsons to her, the minutiae of their lives, to her delight. How glad I was to be the one listening now. This is what we do for those we love. We share in their joys by listening. A well-played hand at bridge is definitely something to be happy about. Love you, Mom, I said, signing off. Love you too, she said, before hanging up. Bertrand Russell said, in human relations, one should penetrate to the core of loneliness in each person and speak to that. Paul redeemed himself, in my opinion, in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 with this. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices always with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. Let your love give voice to your tongue, and you will speak a new language. God bless you all.
Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.